Good evening to all from India. This is Abhivardhan, and we are back again with iGlobal Podcasts. This is a special podcast recorded for Visual Legal Analytica for the show Juristicity. So, what is juristicity? Juristicity is a word which I've coined rather discussing about the aspects of, let us say, how legal ideas and ethical ideas can be used and made better in any environment, whether be it technology, be it environment itself, be it corporate governance, be it anything. And largely, we will be discussing in this series about technology law and intellectual property. We will try to include other issues of importance as well, such as sometimes international law, sometimes even other matters of civil procedure and other issues. So, the first episode, which we are having right now, we are going to discuss something quite interesting because there are multifold perspectives to it. So, let me introduce a very interesting guest who is quite known in a sense that we have had him a lot on IGP. I'm introducing Bogdan. He is a technology geek, an expert in many ways. He has an industry experience, I think, of maybe more than 20 years and 25 years. And we are going to discuss today something quite interesting, which is this idea of whether you can have or grant intellectual property rights to machines, or maybe in a loose tone, as we say, artificial intelligence systems or technologies. I wrote an article for Visual Legal Analytica describing why is it not possible from a general angle, majorly covering the industry questions, and gave the example of even the Annex 1 of the European Union Artificial Intelligence Act. So, Bogdan, welcome to VLA's podcast. And let me ask you the first question very simply. What is this whole understanding that has come up in the industry about granting technologies certain kinds of intellectual property rights? Now we know that under the current regime of the World Intellectual Property Organization, we have five kinds of intellectual property rights. First is trademark, second is copyright, third is your patents, the very, very important ones. Fourth one is integrated circuits, and the fifth one is maybe industrial design. So, how do you see it? How this trend has emerged in these years? Because this thing wasn't discussed much in the tech industry and in the technology law uh, groups, at least for now. So, how do you see it? Even the IP law groups, it has not been discussed, as far as I remember. So, how do you see it? Yeah.
The question that has not been answered coherently yet is why grant IP rights to machines? I mean, is that a reason, like a valid reason? It hasn't been answered coherently. The other questions about international law, because such a fundamental concept of granting or not granting IP rights to an entity has to have a how do I say, a consensus across the world. Otherwise, it's just not going to work out at all, especially in a connected world of today with automated systems, especially AI system that or the output of which can and do impact positively or negatively in unforeseen ways, distant jurisdictions. And so because data travels across jurisdictions in unforeseen ways, therefore the output of these AI systems will also have unforeseen impacts, positive as well as negatives. And so that will span legal jurisdictions. And the question is, well, who's liable? Well, definitely those parties that own the IP rights have some sort of liability, but then who's owning the IP rights? If it's a machine liable, I mean, you cannot sue a machine, is it? Or a system, or a a non-human entity. You can't sue them. So who pays? Who's owning the liability? Um, no answer as yet. No coherent answer as yet. The other one is less technical. It's about the human nature. Should we even give IP rights to things, especially that an AI system is not physical. It has physical parts, of course, but it's not physical. It's abstract. It's mostly abstract. Like an algorithm is an abstraction, and the system has a number of moving parts that come together, but not all the time. And so the system as such is a concept, is not a thing, a physical thing that you can touch and define very well. And therefore, we assign IP rights, such an important thing as IP rights, to something that is not very well definable, and it's more abstract than physical. That's the second question. Plus, is it not innovation and creation a defining characteristic of human species, and IP rights are designed to encourage innovation and creativity? How does this fall into the idea of allocating IP rights to machines? Is it not reducing the humanity of people? Non-technical question, beyond the law. Those are the three questions that require an answer, an agreement of sorts, before doing anything concrete in this field. I haven't seen any coherent answer to any of these. And probably that's also because there are no standards for AI systems yet. They're in the making, but none has been yet devised and implemented. And of course, regulation. Regulation will need standards to work with. So unless there are some standards in place, we cannot have regulation. So in the absence of regulation, why even thinking of doing these fundamental changes to the IP rights, allocating IP rights to machines when those machines are not even regulated at all yet? That's another conflict that I see. But of course, the hype doesn't care about this kind of conflicts. The hype is the hype, and with AI system, it reached, frankly, absurd levels in the last 2 or so years. Absurd levels. Hype is historically present in technology for 100 years or more, but these kind of levels have never before seen. So it's becoming dangerous now because science has been brushed aside, and the good results of applied AI are not talked much about. Instead, what we hear is applications that are borderline, some of them even borderline gimmicks, like NFT, metaverses, and the likes. Blockchain in the sense of currency, digital currency, that part of blockchain I'm talking, not just blockchain in general. So that actually hides the very good, tremendously good applications of AI systems that are very real, but they don't get airtime because they're not hyperable as much. Therefore, they don't get the airtime and is not talked about enough. So the hype is monopolizing the discussion, um, and is influencing decisions, but not necessarily in a good way. Some level of hype is actually good because it makes people excited and insensitivize people to try things, new things, and experiment. So it's good to have a level of hype. I think that's healthy, but there's a limit to everything, and I believe we cross that limit with AI systems when it comes to hype.
So let us break down those questions in this session, and I am already guessing a part two of this session, but let us break down those in this time. So now, one thing which you raised about, if already at a global scale, even if we look at the UNESCO AI recommendations, okay, and I had done a podcast with uh, Maxim Karyuk for AI Now, and I remember discussing this recommendation. I've even read it, and my view is it is a good draft recommendation, but it's just a recommendation to decide some so-called basic principles, which is done in an international body which handles matters related to cultural heritage. So it's a quite intersectional way to say culture and technology are related, because I remember this statement by the UNESCO chief, AI chief, not UNESCO chief, but UNESCO AI chief years ago, whosoever was the UNESCO AI chief at that time, that AI is biased because humans are biased. But the problem is, then the AI is not explainable. The AI has a black box problem, but AI also has an issue where lawyers and policymakers do not understand how technology works. So that is a genuine problem, right? Even in India, for example, and even in other countries, it's not just India. Many policymakers and lawyers do not understand how the technology intrinsically works. So, for example, when they go for arbitrations or court matters, if they are aware of it, then it's fine. Otherwise, it's just limited to commercial matters. So maybe let us ask this question: why did the industry even think of creating this hype of even thinking of the IP rights recognition of technologies like AI in general? So, purpose wise, of course, we can discuss, but let's discuss this first aspect in brief. So, what do you think? Why did they do? What is the trend? Because I think obviously it started with the developed countries for sure. I'm not seeing this hype, by the way, in India yet. I've not seen it in Singapore or ASEAN states. I've not seen it there. So for sure, I'm not aware if it's there, but I'm sure it's not there for now. But of course, it might come to us also. So let's start with how did it begin? Because you seem to know much about this aspect. So here we go. What do you think about it?
Let's break down a little bit this beginning of question of beginning of what more specifically the idea of AI or the hype itself.
So let us say, not the idea. We can say, okay, let's start with the idea of AI itself, because conceptually, we need to determine these things. Hype is something which is like, okay, fine, you create a marketing hype through various things, through some word salad or whatnot. But conceptually, when we say that AI should be given a recognition, so let's take that one. Yeah.
It's AI systems, though not AI. And in fact, we don't really have AI as such today. We have machine learning, neural networks, or deep learning, all these labels, which is not AI. Um, or some people label it narrow AI. Okay, what's that? I don't know. But it's not AI. It doesn't feel, it doesn't understand. Um, it doesn't have empathy, is not sentient, no consciousness, and so on, like what makes people human or living beings human. It does learn, though. It does learn, but that's where it stops right now at this present time. So no matter how much data you throw at it, it's not going to understand it, full stop. Not in the current state of the art of technology. Laws of physics. It's just not going to happen. With different components, very different architecture, fundamentally different architecture, who knows? I mean, it's an open question, of course. We cannot just say, yet, no, definitely not possible. Though the majority of scientists converge to the point that artificial general intelligence is not attainable, but not all. So, we'll see in the future, who knows? But right now, that's definitely not the case, for sure. It's more of a philosophical questions like what Turing said. Let's consider the question, can machine think? 50, at least 50, or at least 70 years ago, that was asked, but his work started in the 30s. Sci-fi, right, that in those times in the 30s and 40s, but as technology and computing evolved, we had the transistor and so on. Then so did this question, and throughout the 50s and 60s, it was again very much hyped, and we saw that the good results of that hype initially in the first few years. Progress has been made, principles discovered, start being applied, good stuff, really good stuff. Then the hype became an overhyped, and then there was the tremendous AI winter, first of it at the beginning of 70s for a while, for a number of years. And so the hype cycle started. We had in total, I think, 3 AI winters or so. Again, these are labels, like huge differences between ups and downs, huge differences, peaks and bottoms. With every breakthrough was followed by an overhype. In the 80s, that was a breakthrough, it was an overhype, and then in the 90s, when the overhype didn't deliver, because no overhype delivers, right? Because it, again, goes beyond that limit. Then another winter in the 90s, around mid 90s, for a number of years, and so on. That's the idea of AI, but really we cannot understand anything about AI systems, anything at all, without understanding automation in general and data in general. Having a solid understanding of automation in data, without that, it cannot be an understanding of AI system, because it's a form of automation, a very complex and advanced form of automation, but it's automation nonetheless. So lawmakers, do they understand automation? I don't think so. They don't have to understand technology inside out, not at all, but the fundamental principles that they have to understand. But that goes to the technologies too. They have to understand the fundamentals of law, which they don't, most of them, of course, they don't. So both parties, the legal domain and the tech domain, have to understand the fundamentals of each other, the fundamental principles of law. Why the important? Society is run on law. Yeah, technology does the job, but really it's because it can exist because of laws, because otherwise it's chaos and wars and you name it, but it's not good. So law is really the framework. Technology does the job though, executes and makes possible all these advancements, positive and sometimes negatives, in society. But the direction is set by the law, and the limits are set by the law, because there are non-technological considerants at play too, which are critical. Of course, who makes the laws, votes on it, changes them, and so on, i.e., the lawmakers, but also everybody that is engaged in that, not necessarily um, judges and ministers, and everybody that is significantly involved in the legal domain uh, will have to understand the fundamentals of automation and data. They have to. And it's going to be their business at stake if they don't. Law firms and all, they have to use data or else they don't exist, right? And that data is very important. Some of that data is very important. It can can mean the difference between a criminal record and non-criminal record, no record at all. It can ruin lives or it can bring justice. So now understanding data is fundamental. Just the basics, just enough. And so the same goes for automation. Um, if these two notions and elements are understood, by the way, data is not defined yet. The term data does not have an agreed definition. There are multiple definitions, of course, like for intelligence, but none is agreed by everyone. But that doesn't mean you cannot understand the fundamental of data, not at all. And so that's what has to happen. And in parallel, the technologies have to understand the fundamentals of law. Like when they design, when they think, when they apply technology, they have to think a little bit from somebody in the legal domain too. A little bit. Just take that into consideration, because again, data been traveling across jurisdictions, and the output of this large-scale automated system that are not they are not based on rules. Like an AI system is not based on predefined rules. It has this feedback loop, and part of the output becomes input, but also the impact of that output becomes input, and that changes the behavior of the system. While with the rule-based automation, the behavior of the system does not change unless the rules change. It has impact, of course, it has real impact on human life, but the behavior of the system does not change unless rules have changes. That is not the case with AI systems because it's not based on rules. That's fundamental of understanding automation, again, feedback loop, and the difference between rule-based and not rule-based automation, and what data means for these systems and for people in general. Right now, the most precious asset of any person in the world is their data, their own data, like what they generate and what they possess natively. The biometrics is data, uniquely identify a person, every single person on the face of the earth. That's not really produced. You're born with it. But your activity, every person has some sort of an output through their behavior. If I can name it output, it's a little bit demeaning, I would say, but every activity has a sort of output. That's data right there. You say something, you walk on the street, you buy something, you sell something, you party, you go to work, you go on holiday, and so even when you sleep, your heartbeat changes and so on. So these activities can be captured to a great extent. Not everything is in the data, of course. There are important aspects that are never going to be in the data, but I'm talking about this physical aspect. They all can be captured in data, but that data belongs to you, to that person, the person that actually generated it. And the thing is, people don't own the data. today. And so, that's the thing. Giving or allowing machines to have copyrights, own IP rights, and all. But that output of theirs is based mostly on data that doesn't belong to them. Certainly, part of data is generated by those machines, for sure, but not in the absence of, not without any data input at all. You can't create something from nothing. Okay, you can't. No, nobody can, whether it's a machine or a person. Nobody can. But that input, it's based on data that doesn't belong to those machines. So essentially, the critical part of that output belongs to somebody else, to the data subjects. Well, guess what? The data subjects don't own it. So shouldn't we talk more about allocating IP rights to people that surrender their personal data? If they say you can have it in return for me using your platform, I give up on that. That's different. But what if it's not the case? As we know, is not the case in so many situations. And what then? That data doesn't belong to the platform by right. It's not produced by the platform at all. The data subject is not being made aware that will be going to be collected and used, and in what ways, by whom, and this and that. Yeah, you can say GDPR. Come on, no company is full GDPR compliant. Let's make that clear. Yet, plus GDPR doesn't apply to all countries. There are so many countries where GDPR doesn't apply, and even in United States there are privacy laws, but they are not the same as GDPR, and so on. And there's a lot of breaches. There's a lot of breaches. And so shouldn't we actually be focused on that? Give IP rights to data subjects, the rightful owners of the data that makes the output of those platforms possible. Is that a fair question? I think it is. Instead, the hype talks about IP rights to machine. What for? Why? Why is that? Is that a fact that machines are human? No, they are not. Are they innovative? No, they are not. No, they are not, because they don't have a consciousness, and they are not sentient, and they don't have empathy, and all these things. Now, they can make something that was not made before, of course, but it's a thing. Bunch of transistors and circuits that produce something that was not produced before, but is based on things that are owned by, well, it should be owned by somebody else, i.e. me and you. For example, me, the general public. There's a lot of data. Most data comes from the general public, but general public doesn't own it, really. So, for example, do we own our biometric data? Should not we have IP rights of our biometric data because it's being exploited for profit? But we don't see a dime out of it. We say, yeah, but you can use this platform, that platform. Yeah, but you have to ask me, I'm going to collect your retina scans. Everybody happy with that? Where will it end? Well, we are not very sure. As Meta said, they don't know where the data on the Facebook platform ends up. And more than that, they said they cannot know. They cannot even know. They cannot, when I say they cannot know, it's not like they have no idea. They have a decent idea, but they cannot pinpoint with any degree of accuracy where this piece of data, i.e. my personal data, for example, will end up or ends up, because it's so complex and complicated. but it's our data, right? In the end, it's our data, and are we being asked that this and that will end up there and then? Well, not, because Facebook itself doesn't know well enough. They don't know well enough, because as they said, they cannot know well enough. And so I would say this should be at the top of the agenda and the top of the hype, not IP rights to machines. But again, this discussion, this question is not hyperable, and therefore it doesn't have much airtime, because if it doesn't fit the agenda, the narrative, then it's going to be silenced by the noise of the hype. That's really what happens. So recently, there's a lawsuit in UK against a supermarket chain, the Co-op is called, because they install cameras, but we know shops will have to have surveillance cameras. That's not what it's all about. It records all the visitors to the shop, and then, based on a record that they already have in a database of people that had some problems with the shop before, maybe shoplifting or maybe antisocial behavior, nothing tremendously negative, like killing people or causing injuries, not as grave as that, but nevertheless it's valid concerns for the store. The point is, obviously they will compare that footage with the DB and then make predictions. So that's a computer vision, deep learning, let's call it an AI system, a third-party AI system. Now, me as a visitor, I'm law-abiding citizens, vast majority are law-abiding citizens. And, we are different races and ethnicities and ages, and some have disabilities, some have no disabilities. The variances is huge. And you can see the problem, right? Everybody is on screen. Everybody can be potentially compared against the DB, and prediction may be made about them. And of course, bias, it's going to be very, very significant. And, everybody happy with that? I don't think so. And they've been sued. They've been sued right now because of that. Some other systems also record the conversation of people. Apparently, I mean, it's not widespread at all. It's early days, but it's intended to be put into practice for the same reason, in the name of safety and security, really. Well, it's all about the hype, is it? How can we apply this technology that is powerful without really thinking much about personal safety and sustainability, of course, because it consumes a lot of electricity at scale, like a lot, but also life impacting. Is life impacting for people that don't even know about it, just for visiting a store? I mean, really? Yeah, in certain places, for sure. I don't know, an embassy or something, an infrastructure facility, even like a data center. Okay, that's a little bit different, is it? But your security cleared anyway before, when you go in there. You just don't turn up and sign in as a guest and go into a data center. That's not gonna happen. You're gonna have your picture taken and so on, but you're gonna be informed before your visit. So you are in the know. You can take the decision: do I go for that, yes or no? You are very clear. Why is it for? What is being collected? How it's gonna be used? And you also be notified is be kept for X amount of days after your visit, and then it's going to be destroyed 90 days, 30 days, whatever that the data subject knows. In this case, not really. Not really. But guess what? The third party that has this AI system built, designed, and all makes money out of it. But that AI system has no value without the data that belongs to the data subjects, i.e., that personal data, the tremendous volume of personal data. It's not only your face. That's actually a small part of it, critical but very small. It's your what you how you walk, when you went in, who are you with, um, how are you dressed, what you're doing. That's the whole dynamics of it, masses of personal data that uniquely identify you as a data subject, just for going to a store, buy necessities, and then out. I don't think many people will be happy with that. Is that if that's the norm? Like, it's really is Orwellian in the extreme, uh, as a lawsuit states against that chain. It is Orwellian in the extreme. Um, so where are the IP rights here? Machines may be very good at making predictions. Let's say, let's hope, uh, and they own the IP rights of those predictions based on my personal data, of which those predictions are not even possible at all, and I have no say in it. But it's a piece of me right there, like my personality. That, like, personal data, it's part of people. It's what make people, individuals. Okay, your shape of the eye, your color of the eye, the way you speak, the way you walk, the way you turn your head, the way you move your hands, all these things are part of what makes your identity. Identity, like, I'm not talking digital identity like some numbers in a spreadsheet that are hashed and scrambled. No, it's like what make you the person that you are. It goes way beyond technology. That it's recorded in bits and used for those predictions, and you gain nothing out of it. And what's more, you may even end up being falsely accused because of bias, just because you're, if I'm not picking on white people, I'm one of them, right? But if it's designed with most data coming from white people of white backgrounds, or European, or North American, let's say, heritage, guess what will happen? If you are Bivardan turned up on that show, you have a much, much higher chance to be wrongly predicted as a troublemaker than myself. I'm not happy with that. And we should
Yeah,
be done this too. So these are really complicated methods, and they go beyond technology. And these are the tough questions to answer in some way or another, and get an agreement in law.
yeah. One thing which I had in mind was that when we look at this whole jurisprudence argument, so I'll remind you. So you're talking about South Africa, right? That in the South African patent or IP office, that somebody went in. Yeah. So that same person. Yeah. So let me give a context. So this so-called AI program or system, I don't know, by the name of Davos. It actually. So I think the owner, I think it was Stephen Taylor or somebody, they tried to give recognition to this to the state. So they try to give recognition to Davos of the status of an inventor, with the human being the patentee. Now they failed everywhere, whether it is the Japanese office, whether it is the, the even in the USPTO they failed, especially in the District Court of Virginia. They also failed in the UK and the European Union, and they might. I'm not sure if they have gone to India yet. Japan, they failed for sure. South Korea, they have not gone, or maybe they have failed. But they went to Australia, and then Australia, there a judgment came, which of course is now overruled. So let me give a context of that judgment as an example. I read the judgment before it was overruled. Justice Beach of that judgment, he says that there could be a chance that an AI system could have that sense to be an inventor, but could not exercise the rights, because it's not a human being, it's not a company, it's not a non-governmental organization, it's not a government either, it's nothing like that which can actually be defined. You know what practical rights you can have, right? Because even if we take the legal interpretation as per the hype, the problem which will fundamentally come is, why do you wish to define the rights, liabilities, accountability, as well as the agency? Because any AI system will have its agency anyways. That happens with any technology. Like I don't know if you are aware of this. This very funny example. So in Hong Kong, I think in 2016, 2014, they tried to make an AI system which could do, I think, algorithmic trading. So algorithmic trading is using algorithms to check the stock market values and all that. Uh, by the way, a general analysis says that algorithmic trading can be used in a good way, and even in India, SEBI and other regulators are trying it in the Dalal Street in Mumbai. But what they are doing using NSE and Bombay Stock Exchange is completely different. But here in Hong Kong, what they tried was they made that AI system, or AI technology as they call it, a shareholder and a member of the board of directors of their company. And I'm like, okay, how is it legally viable? So I've heard these kind of things, and like, people always talk about Sophia and Hanson Robotics, but these two are like the funniest ones I've ever heard, because
The-
it's
they
not.
will, is not going to stop there if it goes on this path. There'll be Nobel
Yeah,
prizes and all sorts of prizes awarded to, well, if the machine is an inventor, Nobel Prize is given also to inventors, right? Like, if the invention makes such a tremendous contribution, of course, not just any invention. But so could be argued that the machine should be awarded a Nobel Prize, and other prizes too. Maybe a Palme d'Or prize for huge contributions to tremendously good movie, let's say. Uh, and in arts, and like, the sky's the limit. Like, where does it stop? Well, the answer is it doesn't stop. It will
we
penetrate
might have an
every
AI
part
based
of
you. Yeah.
humanity.
So
And is
yeah,
it right
continue.
to give? Is it right to give this kind of rights to transistors, because that's what they are in the end. They're all transistors in a form or shape, and electricity. Is that really right? That's the fundamental question. Should we even discuss about machines being inventors? Since by what we mean by inventors is a human attribute. It's a human attribute. Um, Creators and all. I mean, we don't really create anything, we transform, but we build something new that never before done, and therefore that's creativity right there. Um, that's really the fundamental. What for? What for? Who gets the benefits? I'm definitely sure the average people in the street not going to get any sort of benefits. So, what are the benefits? Who is benefiting from these benefits? And does it even make sense uh, to recognize machines as inventors in law? That is, in law, because we know that from the human perspective that is nonsensical. But in law, I'm talking about purely about law. Like you said, member of the board. uh, and that's something that can be unplugged, right? Um,
I mean, it reminds me also of a very interesting AI diplomacy report. So this was written in 2021 or 2020 by a very renowned researchers of AI ethics. But the UAE is actually trying to integrate AI to a whole next level in certain funny ways. But I'll not be shocked if somebody proposes, no, a UN Secretary General who is an AI, or the Prime Minister or President or whatsoever, the head of a state of a government which is AI. I mean, people try to opt for these crazy things. Like I remember this article long back when people proposed just recently after the, so I think it was after this third wave, the third Omicron wave which came in India. We saw this article maybe in some international publication that, oh, in the UN Security Council has five permanent members: US, China, Russia, France, and United Kingdom. We should also have Facebook, which is Meta now, Meta and Twitter and these platforms, quote unquote, YouTube, or maybe Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, as one of the members of the UN Security Council. And I'm like, okay, why? So, what is the rationale for it? So, I guess this spree will go on. People will keep doing this. So it is fascinating to discuss this,
So,
and
so,
sometimes it
so
feels
that
funny.
again, a country, you can at least see it on a map. Okay, it has a physical representation that everybody understands, pretty much everybody. It has representatives, again, persons, physical entities, right? People. Yeah, they change because they get elected or if they dictators and so, but anyway, they change in the end. And that's all very visible by everyone. You look at the TV, you see this summit, you see those faces. Okay, they have names, they have behaviors, they have personalities, and so back and so forth. Uh, what is Facebook? It's faceless, right? Okay. Um, you can't pinpoint it in any form or shape. I mean, sure, it has an icon, but that's about it. But an icon is an icon, right? It's a picture or drawing of sort. That's all. It's not even a form of art. It's an icon. Uh, is that an icon? No, of course not. It has so much influence and all. So it's totally abstract. So putting 100% abstract, they're not even things, they are concepts, uh, on a physical entity is just, I don't know, it is nonsensical. I mean, right. And tomorrow the company may be gone, right? Like companies survive for a while and then they disappear or they get bought off or, they merge and so on. Then what? So Facebook is now Meta, or well, owned by Meta. Imagine Facebook was a permanent member of the Security Council in 2020 and 2021, and then now it's Meta, but it's not actually Meta, it's part of Meta. Right? What does that mean? So we're talking international law here. We're talking, I don't know, um, wars and um, commerce across borders and like big things. And all of a sudden, now who are you dealing with? Is Facebook, is Meta? I mean, I can guarantee you most people don't even understand what Meta is. I don't, for sure. I'm one of them, don't understand. But I can surely understand, what a head of state is. I have no problem understanding that. And I have no problem understanding a country. Yeah, to a good level, of course. That also have abstraction in it, but I can see it on a map. I can see that, people that belong to that country speak this language and that language and they behave in this or that way. I don't understand that much about it, but I understand the fundamentals. What about Meta and Google? And Google is owned by Alphabet. And what is even Alphabet? Who even understand what Alphabet is? Again, I don't. Let alone Google. I don't. Um, so it's complex, complicated, and 100% abstract. Putting that abstraction on something that's supposed to be understood by the majority doesn't really make any kind of sense.
So let us see where we can conclude on this, because um, we have opened a Pandora box when it comes to discussing this, in a sense that, first of all, of course, there's a lot of hype, and it clearly shows that giving these so-called rights sometimes, and or let's not even say sometimes, even in general, if it's not based on proper rationales, or let us say even proper case study based analysis as to why is it being done, why is it being assessed at the first place, there is no chance that such theories could be given any recognition. So I think this best example we see of this understanding is that when you use the term narrow AI, right? And I think when we see the Annex 1 of the European Union's draft AI Act, we see the same thing, that when intelligence, artificial intelligence, and other things are being defined, they're defined as if they're narrow AI. And narrow AI is, as we know, very, very weird in certain ways. So I guess we can discuss more about this aspect of hype because, uh, but I have a question from an angle of corporate governance and corporate ethics because you might be aware about it. Uh, in certain aspects, it feels sometimes that companies and even in so-called in AI inventors and so-called AI developers, they use it for the sake, or they might have a stake on this hype cloud, on this whole theorization that AI should be AI should be given a recognition of an inventor, while patentee rights are given to a company or a human being or whosoever be it. I find it sometimes funny because it could be a potential violation of corporate ethics in many ways. I mean, there are general violations for sure, and there's a long list about it, but it could be potentially an intrusion into the way how corporate governance works when it comes to digital technology. And there is one more field which actually has emerged a lot in the United States. It hasn't come to India yet, which is knowledge management and intellectual property for now. Because legally that has not happened in India under the Patents Act, the Copyright Act, and other laws. But in general, knowledge management is a thing already happening among companies, MNCs, and maybe even unicorns and startups. I'm not sure. So, why do I say that is simply because knowledge management shapes the way we look at the necessity of having any IP rights and utilizing it to its best exploited extent, right? Now, there could be potential issues of corporate ethics if we try to think that, not think, let us say, we even try to pretend that we can give recognition to AI of an inventor or something like that, or I giving other IP rights to AI. Honestly, I do not find any AI system which is creative in that sense. So, I mean, I'm fully on with you on that. But yeah, I mean, on corporate ethics to end with, what do you think? Yeah.
I'm not really a specialist of any kind in governance. I'm certainly affected by governance in big ways, but it's drawing the line, is it? Of course, it's unethical many times because if the only aim, like the only aim, not the top aim, the only aim is to, continuous growth, which again, it's against the laws of physics. You cannot just, nothing grows continuously forever, nothing. Eventually disappears. But anyway, it's always ups and downs. Yeah, the trend may be up, 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 but then until it stops because, the company or the person or the country and so on disappears. Nothing is forever, is it? So it's a paradigm shift. But if you stick to that, then of course it's essentially not ethical, really. From philosophic point of view, it's not ethical. Um, that's why you have to say no. Everybody have to say no at some point to stuff. And in fact, you cannot focus without saying no most of the time, because focusing is about saying no. Quoting Steve Jobs here. Uh, and so is innovation. And so is innovation to um, researchers, like good researchers and scientists and artists, they mostly say no. Not all the time. They are not naysayers. No, they have an open mind and they experiment. They don't have expectations. That's why they experiment thousands and thousands of times. But they are prepared to discard one avenue and the other, even if they like it, they love it, but they prefer to discard it if the evidence goes contrary to that love of theirs. That's what they make them good scientists and good artists and good people, the capability of saying no against their desires many times, against their vested interest many times. They give up on vested interest for the right thing. That's high ethics. This is an ethical thing to do. Marie Curie discovered radio. Radio. Okay. She could have been a trillionaire probably by now. Well, she died a billionaire by the time of death if she would have licensed it. And in fact, she was approached to license it and she refused. She said it's important, should belong, access to it should be free for humanity. And she did not license it because she gave it up in a way, right? She could have claimed IP rights by law. Is it? She discovered it and so on, and she applied it successfully. And the mobile X-ray stations in World War One that saved countless lives. She invented that. It was like tremendous application of radiology. She gave it all up, you might say, but in fact, did she give anything up? It was the right thing to do. But that's ethics at play. Now, she did not die a rich woman by any chance at all. But it was the right thing to do. So saying no is as important as saying yes, and most of the time we have to say no because otherwise we're not going to focus. We're going to be drowning in noise and going sideways and never focus on the right things and lose the signals and lose our mission to do good. That's my take on governance.
All right. So it was a pleasure to host you, Bogdan, and I am already expecting maybe a part two of this discussion or part three of this discussion very soon, maybe sometime, and maybe we can discuss other aspects of technologies per se, because I honestly found this discussion fascinating. So it was certainly a pleasure to host, and I will end this session. I thank the viewers and the listeners who heard and watched this episode of Juristicity. We will be coming up with more content and live sessions in the coming weeks. So till then, people can stay tuned. And thank you so much for uh, watching and hearing Juristicity by Visual Legal Analytica.
Thank you, Abhivandan, for having me and looking forward to another great discussion. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Sorry about the camera. The platform did not detect my camera, though it's fully functional. But hey, I tried.
Yeah, yeah, no worries. Yeah. So we end this session, and it was certainly a pleasure. Thank you all.